satisfaction. He was regular and punctual, and did not keep the congregation waiting, and he had considerable experience in showing that there was yet balm in Gilead. He had about 5 ways of showing it, the variance depending upon the circumstances. If, as not infrequently happened, the person deceased was a stranger to him, he would inquire in the passage, "Was it a man or a woman? Boy or girl? Married or single? Any children, young uns or old uns?" When these questions have been answered, he was ready. He knew exactly which of his 5 consolatory addresses to deliver. They were all sufficiently vague and general to cover the considerable variety of circumstances, and even when he misheard the replies in the passage, and dilated on the grief of a departed willow's relic, the results were not fatal throughout. The few impossible passages might be explained by the mishearing of the audience. Sometimes, very rarely, he would venture on a supplementary sentence or two, fitting the specific occasion, but very cautiously, for a man with a reputation for extempore addresses cannot be too wary of speaking on the spur of the moment. Off obituary lines he was a failure. At any rate, his one attempt to preach from an English synagogue pulpit resulted in a nickname. The theme was remorse, which he explained with much care to the congregation. "For instance," said the preacher, "the other day I was walking over London Bridge, when I saw a fishwife standing with a basket of red herrings. I says, 'How much?' She says, 'Two for threepence.' I say, 'Oh, that's frightfully dear. I can easily get 3 for twopence.' But she wouldn't part with them at that price, so I went on, thinking I'd meet another woman with a similar lot over the water. They were lovely fat herrings, and my chaps watered in anticipation of the treat of eating them. But when I got to the other end of the bridge, there was no other fishwife to be seen. So I resolved to turn back to the first fishwife, for after all, I reflected, the herrings were really very cheap, and I had only complained in the way of business. But when I got back, the woman was just sold out. I could have torn my hair with vexation. Now that's what I call remorse." After that the Rabbi was what the congregation called remorse, also red herring. The Rabbi's fondness for concrete exemplification of abstract ideas was not, however, to be stifled. There was one illustration of charity which found a place in all the 5 sermons of consolation. "If you have a pair of old breeches, send them to the Rabbi." Rabbi Remorse Red Herring was, however, as is the way of preachers, himself aught but a concrete exemplification of the virtues he inculcated. He lived generously through other people's generosity, but no one could boast of having received a farthing from him over and above what was due to them, while Schnorrers, who deemed considerable sums due to them, regarded him in the light of a defalcating bankrupt. He, for his part, had a countervailing grudge against the world, fancying the work he did for it but feebly remunerated. "I get so little," ran his bitter plaint, "that I couldn't live if it was not for the fasts." And indeed the fasts of the religion were worth much more to him than to Yankele'. His meals were so profuse that his sayings from this source were quite a little revenue. As Yankele' had pointed out, he was married, and his wife had given him a child, but it had died at the age of 7, bequeathing to him the only poignant sorrow of his life. He was too jealous to call in a rival consolation preacher during those dark days, and none of his own 5 sermons seemed to fit the case. It was some months before he took his meals regularly. At no time had anyone else taken meals in his house except by law entitled. Though she had only 2 to cook for, his wife habitually provided for 3, counting her husband no mere unit. She herself reckoned as half. It was with intelligible perturbation, therefore, that Yankele, dressed in some other man's best, approached the house of Rabbi Remorse Red Herring about a quarter of an hour before the Sabbath midday meal, intent on sharing it with him. "No dinner, no marriage," was da Costa's stern ukase. What wonder if the inaccessible meal took upon itself the grandiosity of a wedding feast? Deborah da Costa's lovely face tantalized him like a mirage. The Sabbath day was bleak, but chillier was his heart. The Rabbi had apartments in Stewart Street, Spitalfields, an elegant suite on the ground floor, for which he stinted himself in nothing but charity. At the entrance was a porch, a pointed Gothic arch of wood supported by two pillars. As Yankele mounted the 3 wooden steps, breathing as painfully as if they were 300, and wondering if he would ever get merely as far as the other side of the door, he was assailed by the temptation to go and dine peacefully at home and represent to da Costa that he had feasted with the Rabbi. Manasseh would never know. Manasseh had taken no steps to ascertain if he satisfied the test or not. Such carelessness, he told himself in righteous indignation, deserved fitting punishment. But, on the other hand, he recalled Manasseh's trust in him. Manasseh believed him a man of honour, and the patron's elevation of soul awoke an answering chivalry in the parasite. He decided to make the attempt at least, for there would be plenty of time to say he had succeeded after he had failed. Vibrating with tremors of nobility as well as apprehension, Yankele lifted the knocker. He had no programme, trusting to chance and mother wit. Mrs. Remorse Red Herring half opened the door. "I vish to see the Rabbi," he said, putting one foot within. "He's engaged," said the wife, a tiny thin creature who had been plump and pretty. "He's very busy talking to a gentleman." "Ah, but I can vait. But the Rabbi will be having his dinner soon." "I can vait until after dinner," said Yankele obligingly. "Oh, but the Rabbi sits long at table." "I don't mind," said Yankele with undiminished placidity. "The longer the better." The poor woman looked perplexed. "I'll tell my husband," she said at last. Yankele had an anxious moment in the passage. "The Rabbi wishes to know what you want," she said, when she returned. "I want to get married," said Yankele with an inspiration of veracity. "But my husband doesn't marry people." "Why not?" "He only brings consolation into households," she explained ingenuously. "Vell, I won't get married without him," Yankele murmured lugubriously. The little woman went back in bewilderment to her bosom's lord. Forthwith out came Rabbi Remorse Red Herring, curiosity and cupidity in his eyes. He wore the skull cap of sanctity, but looked like the gourmand in spite of it. "Good Sabbath, sir. What is this about your getting married?" "It's a long story," said Yankele, "and as your good wife told me your dinner is just ready, I mustn't keep you now." "No, there are still a few more minutes before dinner. What is it?" Yankele shook his head.
"I couldn't think of keeping you in this draughty passage."
"I don't mind. I don't feel any draught."
"That is just where the danger lies. You didn't notice, and one day you find yourself lay up with rheumatism, and you will have remorse," said Yankele with a twinkle. "Your life is precious. If you die, who will console the community?"
It was an ambiguous remark, but the Rabbi understood it in its most flattering sense, and his little eyes beamed. "I would ask you inside," he said, "but I have a visitor."
"No matter," said Yankele. "What I have to say to you, Rabbi, is not private. A stranger may hear it."
Still undecided, the Rabbi muttered, "You want me to marry you?"
"I have come to get married," replied Yankele.
"But I have never been called to marry people."
"It's never too late to mend, they say."
"Strange, strange," murmured the Rabbi reflectively.
"What is strange?"
"That you should come to me just today. Why did you not go to Rabbi Sandman?
Rabbi Sandman, replied Yankele with contempt. Where would be the good of going to him?
But why not?